Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Dark Eldar Mandrakes in a Ynnari army, and if they're in fact better than Swooping Hawks. So, Swooping Hawks and Mandrakes actually kind of fulfill the same roles, Mandrakes for Dark Eldar and Swooping Hawks for, of course, the Craftworld Eldar. But what separates Mandrakes from Swooping Hawks isn't their damage output, it's actually the combination of abilities that allows them to control the board better. And on an objective-based unit, that is key. So what we're going to be kind of discussing today is if actually Mandrakes have taken the throne away from Swooping Hawks in the objective role. So without further ado, let us go ahead and jump right into it and talk about Mandrakes in a Ynnari army. But first, we're just going to do a quick overview of today's video. We're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special roles of Mandrakes, their strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, and lastly, the role Mandrakes play in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of them. Starting with their stats, Mandrakes have movement 8, which is pretty fast, on the same level as witches and the like. They have a 5+ invulnerable save, and that's pretty much it. So they're very squishy, as they don't really have a regular armor save and can't really benefit from cover, seeing as their save is a 7+. So you're never going to get a great save with these guys, and you're never going to get better than a 5+. As far as their melee potential goes, they are better than Swooping Hawks in combat. They have 3 attacks each at strength 5, but with 0 AP. So they're not necessarily going to be doing damage to mech equivalents or things like that. They're really better and more effective against targets with low armor and low toughness. Things that you might find camping on objectives in the backfield. The ranged weapons are interesting. They're strength 5 and assault for objective play. And lastly, they have devastating wounds. So while they do have a pretty good rule in devastating wounds, the volume of attacks isn't great, which means that it won't proc often. So you can probably guarantee at least 1 or 2 devastating wounds at damage 1, but that's about it. And at that point, Swooping Hawks are much better in the damage game than Mandrakes are. As for their abilities, though, this is kind of where they pull ahead of Swooping Hawks in a big way. They have Infiltrate and Stealth, making them good at getting positions on the board early. And they have the ability Fade Away, which is essentially Skyleap with a different name. So, just like Swooping Hawks, they have the ability to exit the table at the end of your opponent's turn and enter reserve, after which they can basically engage anywhere on the board outside of 9 inches of enemy units. So what that means is that first turn, you can have them infiltrate, block a large area of the board off from your opponent, whether they be infiltrators or scouts or anything like that. And then at the end of your opponent's first turn, when they move up to try to engage the Mandrakes, hopefully the Mandrakes are out of line of sight and don't get shot at, which is what they should be doing at all times. They can go back into reserve, pop in anywhere they want the next turn, and either score on objectives or go behind enemy lines and take out a vulnerable target, depending on what your opponent leaves open. So that is something you have to look out for. Mandrakes may not have a lot of damage in and of themselves, but they are good at taking out certain targets very effectively. Namely lighter targets with very little armor and low toughness, or lone operatives that happen to find themselves unscreened. As far as their unit composition, they come in units of 5 for 70 points, making them slightly cheaper than Swooping Hawks, or 10 for 140. So this is a pretty cheap cost for an objective unit that has this much board control potential, which is why they're really good in a Craftworld Eldar army, because after all, Craftworld Eldar are all about controlling the board. And same goes for the Ynnari. So another thing that's great about them being so cheap is that they're pretty expendable, so if you do lose them in the opponent's backfield trying to take an objective or something like that, you can always bring in the Ynnari for some quick and easy backup. As far as their keywords go, they have the infantry keyword, and that's it. And also Eldari, so they can benefit from some Eldari stratagems. As far as their strengths and weaknesses go, I think their biggest strength is that they can infiltrate, giving them good board control, and the combination of that with the ability Fade Away to give them excellent objective play in the subsequent rounds. So they're basically a unit that can be anywhere you want them to be at any given time, which makes them a really big threat and plays a lot of mind games with your opponent. They do have decent combat and shooting, effective against lighter targets, but I wouldn't expect them to do any heavy damage. But then again, that's not how you want to use them anyway. As far as their weaknesses go, they're super squishy. They only have a 5+ invul, so any kind of indirect fire is going to be able to take them out quite easily. They do get a natural stealth, but it's usually not going to be enough to save them against a high volume of attacks. They're also not particularly great at shooting or close combat alone, so you really do need to use their damage in combination to be able to take out the targets you need to. Alright, so as for their combos and synergies, believe it or not, Prince Riel is one of the best units they actually work with, and that's because he can redeploy them after infiltrating, and you can follow that up with a fadeaway at the end of your opponent's turn. So check this out, right? They infiltrate up the board, they block enemies from, being able to infiltrate or using, scout or whatever. And then, on top of that, Prince Riel uses his ability to redeploy them to safety. So that could be on your side of the board, out of range of enemy weapons, or, out of line of sight. And then they can use fadeaway at the end of your opponent's turn and pop up somewhere else on the board. So that is a fantastic combination of abilities that really works well to play mind games with your opponent. They're also great at killing isolated lone operatives on the squishier side, especially with unparalleled foresight, which does give them a single reroll to hit and wound with both their shooting and close combat. No, they don't have Strands of Fate, but, you can get lucky and you can get a charge off on a 9 if you roll well. Now, again, I know that's probably not going to happen all the time, but they have just enough damage with their shooting to be able to eliminate most lone operatives that aren't very tough, right? Assassins, enemy solitaires, things like that. If you decide to put them in a Falcon, they can reroll their wounds, highly increasing their chance of getting mortals. Again, I don't think that's the best way to run them, but, there could be times in a game where, for example, you use fadeaway, you score on objectives, and then maybe, you don't want to keep going in your opponent's backfield because they have reserves coming in or whatever, and you can fade away again, go to your side of the board, embark on the Falcon, and maybe get some rerolls to wound later in the game. And I know that's going to take a lot of setup, but, you never know, it could happen, right? And then Doom, of course, gives you +1 to wound. So are you going to really be using Doom and stuff like that on these guys? Probably not. I think as far as their combos and synergies go, you're really going to be looking for things that help their objective play. I think Prince Riel is one of the best things to do that. Doom and, putting them in a Falcon, stuff like that, while it does increase their damage, are probably better used on a unit that's focus is dealing damage. So let's go ahead and ask the question that we asked at the beginning of this video. Are Mandrakes better than Swooping Hawks? So for objective play, I think they are better overall. Swooping Hawks are the clear winners when it comes to range damage. Swooping Hawks just have much better damage and maneuverability. So, they're going to win that battle. But for objective play, Mandrakes, in my opinion, are much better. And that's because they have Infiltrate, which allows them to threaten positions and establish early board control, and can immediately follow up with Fade Away, which works exactly like Skyleap. And yes, you can't hold them in reserve forever, you need to come in during the next turn, but often that's going to be what you want to do anyway. And they're actually cheaper points-wise than Swooping Hawks, and if you have Riel, you can play some serious mind games and throw your opponent really off, and cause them to make some serious deployment errors, which can work in your favor for the rest of your army. Alright, so what is the role of Mandrakes in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of them? So Mandrakes are pure and simple an objective unit first and a damage dealer second. Adapt at playing mind games with your opponent before taking advantage of a key opening. They are best used to block other infiltrators and scouts from coming into the midboard, and then quickly using Fade Away to appear somewhere else on the table and score on objectives from there. Occasionally, they are also good at isolating lone operatives if there's a target of opportunity, but if there isn't, they're perfectly happy just scoring on objectives. And there are going to be some games where you probably think, oh, these Mandrakes, they have no good targets, right? Against some opponents. Like if you go against Custodes, for example, Mandrakes are not going to have a single good target in that matchup, right? Because most of their targets are going to be extremely heavily armored, and if you try to engage them in close combat, Custodes will cut them down before they even get the chance to strike. So don't, right? Ignore your opponent, play the objective game, and just use them to score. And if your opponent is, concerned with the mandrakes, then they will waste firepower on them and they will waste time trying to kill them. Make them as hard to kill as possible, run them out of line of sight, use fade away every turn, and watch your opponent get frustrated at trying to take them out. That's how you should use them in a matchup where they realistically can't do any damage. Okay, so in conclusion, mandrakes are a great objective unit that are fairly cheap and are better at playing mind games than even the sneaky Swooping Hawks, a unit that I love for that exact reason. I really like Swooping Hawks because that's exactly what they do. They play mind games with your opponent and force your opponent to backtrack a lot of the times to be able to deal with them, and if they're doing that, then the rest of your army is going to control the board better. And mandrakes basically take this to a step further because they also have infiltrate. So they combine the abilities of a ranger with the abilities of a Swooping Hawk, and I think that is a brilliant combination of abilities for objective play. And although they're kind of hard to obtain, I know the old metal models are probably the most popular ones. They're the ones I used to have. Unfortunately, no longer. If you can get a hold of them or already own them, they are super cool. They have really cool models and really cool sculpts. And oftentimes you will be able to also just pick them up as proxies, right? There's a lot of companies that sell proxy models and things like that of mandrakes. So if you are able to pick them up and play them in games, they can score you a lot of points on objectives. Just don't expect them to do a ton of damage as well. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow considerably. If you do want to join our Patreon, free trials are activated and that will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a growing community of Eldar players who like to talk about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will go ahead and leave the link for that in the description for those of you who are interested. I also have a channel store page for those of you looking to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel. You can check that out in the description as well. And if you want to pick up some discounted Eldar miniatures from Amazon, I also have an affiliate link down there too. And I think right now the Combat Patrol is going for around $112 or $113 in the US. So definitely check that out if you are interested in grabbing some discounted models and helping the channel at the same time. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. Have some great games this weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.